Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the afternoon session of this conference. Our keynote speaker for this part of the afternoon is Michel Barnier, the European Commissioner for Internal Markets and Services. In your material, you do have an extensive resume of the Commissioner's career. Prior to being appointed as Commissioner for Internal Markets, he held a number of high-ranking positions in the French government and in commerce. Having become the Commissioner, he embarked on the Green Paper on Audit Policy, which has stimulated extensive discussion, extensive thought. And what it has done is make the profession look at itself and see whether it is fit for purpose in today's and tomorrow's world, as opposed to the past. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing the Commissioner's thoughts and hopefully progress to date on what is happening at the Commission with regard to the outcome from the consultation on the Green Paper. So I have the honor and privilege to introduce Commissioner Barnier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for your invitation, and if you don't mind, I will switch to French, not only to give the proof that the cultural diversity is necessary even in your large world of audit. Et je remercie par avance les interprètes qui me permettront de bien
and I
me
want to
faire
thank
comprendre.
the interpreters in advance who enable me to be well understood. Thank you, Chair Philip Johnson, and your entire team for this new opportunity you're giving me to meet accountants, auditors,
Vos professions, vos métiers, vos missions.
and your professions and your missions are extremely important as far as I'm concerned.
Avec la Commission européenne,
And now that I have to implement the regulation agenda with the Commission associated with the G20 in drawing all the lessons we must from the financial crisis.
dans tous les domaines de cet
And
agenda qui
I
est
want,
extrêmement large.
in this agenda, which is extremely broad, I want to construct the most intelligent regulations and the most effective supervision.
Vous avez dit, Monsieur le Président, que
So, Mr. Chair,
carrière politique ou un parcours
you said that I have
de
a
revenir à la Commission.
political career before I came back to the Commission, which is true.
Toutes les étapes de ma vie publique ont été
All of the stages of my public life have been helpful and still are today. Now, for example, this morning there was a conference of 100 people in Brussels on renovation that I started of all of the rules of public supply contracts. This is as much as 17% of the European economy. And I want to simplify and facilitate corporate life via internet.
un certain nombre de services sociaux. Donc je vais rénover.
And also to maintain our social services. So I want to renovate.
Le fait d'avoir dirigé une
And
collectivité territoriale pendant
the fact that I directed the Savoie, a local territory, for almost 20 years was very helpful to me in thinking about how we could reform public supply contracts.
aussi une autre chose.
Now, something else I also wanted to confirm to all of you. I don't want to improvise.
Je ne veux pas me précipiter.
I don't want to go too fast,
Avec de l'idéologie.
and I don't want to impose an ideology, not here, not elsewhere.
Que chacun comprenne.
I want everyone simply to understand that I'm determined
Du G20,
to set up an agenda for the G20
nous le devons.
and to draw the lessons from this recession. We owe this to the economy, we owe it to the taxpayers who are paid too much for banking errors, and we owe it to citizens, including yourselves. Look at what's happening in all of your countries now, with the rise in populist movements, protectionist movements that would like countries to move back to their own borders. Now, who are the first victims of this protectionism in many countries? And it's the whole market. It's the European project. So we really need to convince citizens that we are drawing lessons from the crisis in all fields, and I'm going to do that by most intelligent supervision possible, by preparing it well after considerable consultation, but it's going to be done. And then I have another objective, and that is to move on from that regulation, which is a reaction and repairing, to a different kind of regulation that's going to be proactive and facilitating for companies and citizens. And this document that I've presented for the Commission, which is the Market Act, also concerns your profession. And we have 12 levers to act on our home market. For those of you who were present at the conference that we organized, and then I hope I'm not repeating myself too much. You asked me, Chair, to describe my convictions and our orientations, and I think it's fairly reassuring, in fact, for you to hear that the things that I believe in today are those that I presented earlier this year. And I hope that these orientations can be used as the groundwork for your own work. In any case, I'm very happy to meet with you regularly, and I'm very happy to see that many of you have taken your time to answer our consultation. The time that you have taken is not wasted. And I can give you examples of many regulations that I'm setting up on some very complex issues. For example, in the Parliament, we're now talking about regulations on derivatives. And these are exchanges to as much as $600 billion. We're going to be standardizing. We're going to be encouraging transparency. We're going to throw light on all these products for some people who like to work in shadows. Some of these texts are extremely complicated. They're 600 pages long. But this text is fairly different from what came out of my own department, and this is because of the consultation. This is because of the expertise of the stakeholders and those of you who responded. So the Commission has launched several proposals to reform the financial sector. I mentioned derivatives. We could also talk about short selling, which is also being discussed in Parliament now, and other reforms that I think you're going to be interested in: consumer protection, improvement of guarantees of deposits, protection and compensation of investors, and rules that I hope will lead to responsible loans, and then the full implementation of the single European payment area. And in upcoming weeks or months, I'll be presenting fundamental texts. And I use the same methods, precautionary and consultation. So at the end of July, we'll be presenting texts on the Basel measures. This will be a capital requirement 4. Then September we'll be presenting a package on banking resolution. So that in this field too, prevention is worth a great deal of cure, and will also be presenting a fundamental text on reviews of financial markets, and this is going to cover almost half of the matters that are covered in the United States by the Frankfurt Act. We want to fill in some gaps there. And I'll also be presenting a second series of regulations, and Lord knows that it's needed, and that is on ranking agencies. And I hope we have the same kind of ambition from our partners in the European Parliament and the Council of Ministers, so that we can adopt these texts as quickly as possible, knowing that in democracy, time is always slower than on financial markets. So, ladies and gentlemen, we are drawing lessons from this recession. Some things are not going quite fast enough, perhaps not quite far enough, but we are doing this stage by stage. We're determined to do so, and in all financial sectors, including yours. Our economy, our citizens have suffered from the repercussions of this recession. Now, perhaps the worst is over, as the banks say, but this is their crisis may be over. But recession isn't necessarily over. And I'm not just referring to Greece or Portugal. I'm also talking about the economic, social, human, and political consequences of the financial crisis over the last 4 years. We owe it to the taxpayer, who can really not afford a new crisis, and we owe it to citizens who will not accept it. We have to avoid new outbreaks, so every sector must be up to its level. Now, as far as the audit goes, we mentioned some of the weak points, and we took the time to concert on it with the green paper that comes out in November. And again, I want to thank you for having contributed to this, being involved in it, and you have contributed to the spirit that we will be publishing this in November 2011. Now, I'd like to say a bit about a certain number of orientations that you will find in our legislative proposals for November. These orientations are becoming systematically more specific, thanks to the consultations that we have regularly and to the work of my department. All these orientations target the same objective, which is to ensure the future of the profession of auditor by making it structurally unchallengeable. We want to concentrate on 3 major aspects. And I'd like to say thank you, Mr. Chair, to say that I appreciate the fact that you are discussing all of these issues here today. The first is independence of the profession, opening, diversification of the audit market is the second one, and then the creation of a better integrated European market and reinforce supervision. Now, the first aspect is independence. And I think that this is really the key word for this profession, where credibility and confidence are the absolute prerequisites. And quality and credibility, of course, is a first concern. We need this to recover our growth. And growth is dependent on a certain number of criteria at the heart of all these reforms. I think the auditors are keys in this issues, and a number of our stakeholders have not yet recovered total confidence in corporate accounts. They're not really sure that the auditor is independent. And this mistrust, this lack of confidence, of course, jeopardizes investment. And there is a risk of a vicious circle that we need to turn around. So for this reason, the question of auditing is absolutely crucial. Their independence must be maintained. This is a sine qua non condition to confidence and respect in their report. An auditor must be above any suspicion, and we know that in this field, perceptions are very important. So what do we see fairly often? Auditors are sometimes too closely linked to the companies they are auditing. So when a financial manager of a big European company says that he wants his auditor to be docile, I think that manager is prejudicial to the whole profession. When you see a lot of companies that maintain the same auditing company for decades and sometimes as much as a century, this is not good for the profession. The fact that the choice of an auditor is not done via transparent tenders also is prejudicial to the profession. Now, I respect all the points of view that some of you may have, and you may not agree with my diagnosis, and you might think a bit too severe, but I am convinced is that the status quo, as I said in February, is not an option. And we're going to be working on a certain number of solutions now. Some of these orientations are sufficiently detailed so that I can talk about them today. So now I would look into mandatory rotation of auditing companies after a certain amount of time. What we need is a fair balance between too much rotation, which would be unfortunate for the quality of the audit, and too little rotation, which is hard on independence. Also, too many so-called annex or non-audit services are given to companies that are being audited. And for the large companies, these may, in fact, create more income than the audits themselves. So how can you be totally independent in your judgment about a company when you are advising it on its growth strategy? I am convinced that we need to limit or perhaps even prohibit non-audit services for clients for which one's doing an audit. I wonder if we shouldn't go as far as to propose strictly auditing companies that could not provide other services, and this might also have an advantage of opening up the audited market to a lot of small companies that don't have access to it today. So we're thinking about the feasibility of this possibility, and we're also trying to find the right level of proportionality. So this is our first effort. The second is diversifying this market. Only about a generation ago, there were 8 major firms on this market. Today, it's a very concentrated market. It's too concentrated. And it's particularly concentrated when the audit firms themselves are auditing very large firms. We have 4 major companies that audit 80% of the listed companies, but in certain national markets, we're talking about the big 3 or the big 2 rather than the big 4. And you know that in the largest European economy, there are only really 2 audit firms, they have as much as 90% of the listed companies on the Dextron, and in Spain it's a big one, just one, that audits all of the major banks and has 58% of the market. Now, I'm not talking about any ideological question here. I'm not crusading against the Big Four, whatever you might, the impression you might be. I'll be meeting, in fact, with the president of one of the Big Four in the United States this week. But I cannot accept that the market for audits of large companies is dominated by only 4 networks, when there are as many who would like to have access to that in Europe. Now, I'm coming. When I got here, I was perceived as a regulating old school Frenchman, and as you can see now that what we're doing now, making a huge effort to create diversity. And we want to create diversity in another extremely concentrated market, which is rating agencies. And here I have proposed some very significant structuring measures for that market. So now, for audits, we are quite attentively monitoring the concentration of that market in Europe. For example, what happened in Denmark recently, or elsewhere, for example, in Brazil. Acquisition of medium-sized companies by the Big Four is something I'm concerned with. This is detrimental to the competitive position of the networks. They mean that the average-sized networks cannot possibly have access to audits to large companies, and this is very contrary to the efforts we're trying to make. So we are following several possibilities now. One of those is joint audits. I'm also thinking about regular tenders or regular competition, more transparency, and I think we should prohibit restrictive clauses in favor of the Big Four. And I think this practice is totally unacceptable in a European market where competition should be sincere, free and authentic. So this is the second question we're working on. And the third major issue of the project is the creation of a European market and reinforcement of supervision. Paradoxically, this very concentrated market is still very fragmented on a national level. Now, of course, the solution here is European integration. From the outset, the Commission's role has clearly been to promote free movement of professionals, and we are looking into several possibilities to making the European market more European, starting by a European passport for auditors. And I am also responsible for professional qualifications, and there are a number of very protected, very regulated professions in Europe, and I'd also like to facilitate mobility for them. I don't think it's acceptable that an auditor has to take additional examinations in every company where he wants to work. Mobility, including mobility of auditors, is a must if we want to improve our competitive position. There are other possibilities. We have automatic recognition by illegal firms that are authorized in other states. We could give a European label, which would mean that all of those companies could do audits in larger companies. Another possibility would be to harmonize auditing standards throughout the European Union. We're now studying the best way to do this, to ask the member states to introduce the international auditing standards. And here it is important to have common rules that also contribute to mobility of professionals. In this field, like in others, we must be discerning. We have to avoid causing additional costs for small companies that are being audited and for medium-sized auditing firms. And this is also true of the small and medium-sized players. But another point that I mentioned for this issue, which is supervision, I think that if the European market is going to work well, we must have closer cooperation between European supervising bodies. So we would like the supervisory bodies to cooperate and to exchange and even mutualize their efforts. This cooperation should be done within the new European Market Authority, the ESMA, which has been operational since January. I would also like to reinforce supervisory bodies with regard to the national governments, and they should be totally independent of auditors and their professional organizations. Finally, we need to improve communication between the auditing firms and regulators to reinforce the preventive role of auditors. An auditor learns a great deal about a company. During his assignment, he has privileged access to a lot of information, but unfortunately, this information is not always given in a structured way to the supervisory bodies, to the management, to audit committees, and to shareholders. And I think we can change that while respecting the roles of all, and particularly that of the supervisory bodies. So I've taken quite an amount of your time here. There's still a number of weeks before this job is done, and so that is why I would really like to hear your conclusions, proposals, critiques. After this conference, and during which a certain number of my staff members are here to listen. I think we have a common objective, which is to redefine, reinforce, and enhance the auditor's role. And I would like to confirm my commitment to reforming this role towards more responsibility for legitimate concerns of our accountants and our investors. I'm going to be very attentive to the report of the European Parliament that's going to be adopted just after the summer. Mr. Antonio Hidalgo is the rapporteur of that committee, and he'll be presenting their work a little later. And I'm particularly referring to the European Parliament because I talked about the whole agenda of financial regulations, markets, stock exchanges, financial rating agencies, and some others. It's a whole sector. Now, so there's some very complex subjects, and there are many of them, industrial propriety as well, public markets. All of the rules are on the interior market, all of these subjects. When we propose legislation, we must consider and we must co-decide with the European Parliament. And the European members of Parliament have got a role that's equivalent to that of the ministers in our consultation, in our contacts. I'm sure you haven't forgotten that, so you mustn't forget that under the Lisbon Treaty, the European Parliament, and I think democratically speaking, this is a very good thing. This is very, very good and rigorous work being done, and their role is equivalent to that of the Council Ministers of Finance or of economics. So I think it's very good that you'll be hearing Mr. Masip Hidalgo on this question as well. Now, I'd like to conclude with that. Now, of course, Europe is not an island, it's a continent. that has pooled its destiny, but while respecting national personalities. This is not simple. We, as commissioners, have a fairly unusual role, sort of collective prime minister that makes proposals to those who make decisions, the Council of Ministers and the European Parliament. But we are not an island. We are deciding for ourselves in a global world, and we must be very attentive to what's happening in the rest of the world. I spend a lot of time in a cross-Atlantic dialogue, and I'd like this to be reinforced. But we're very sincere with the Americans, but we mustn't be naive. I met with the American regulating body recently, and I will be going again to be sure that what we've decided jointly in the G20, this is where 80% of financial exchanges take place. It's all across Atlantic. That's why I've given priority to the dialogue with the Americans. And I insist on having a constructive dialogue with them. And I particularly want to pay homage to Mr. James Doddy, whom you've invited here, because I think it's a very important place with you here today. So in this field and the others that I mentioned earlier, we have a lot of discussions, and we could have subjects for a lot of divergence with the Americans as concerns their effective implementation of accounting standards. On the question of auditing standards, we also must work together. And this is why it's particularly important to dialogue with the President of the American Supervisory Authority. But we really need a dialogue. We need to reach an intelligent consensus with the American authorities. We must steer away from underlapping, which is, of course, is the opposite of overlapping. If our legislation does not dovetail, this will be detrimental to trade and business. But we mustn't be naive. What they do without consultation, of course, so do we. And they have provided for regulations for derivatives, for public supply markets, for any number of the subjects I've been talking about today. But I wager that we can work together well, in confidence, but without any naivety. So I'm sorry that I'm going to have to leave very quickly. Perhaps we can have a quick exchange. But in any case, my whole department is at your disposal, and would be happy to answer the questions that you have on your particular sector and how to achieve the legislation that facilitates your job and improves the markets we are working on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for your insight to your thinking and that of the Commission. I think the majority of the people in the profession have been looking for some time regarding the adoption of ISAs as part of the way forward. And many people have questioned the mechanism by which you may do that. Have you formulated your thoughts at this point in time with regard to whether it be regulation, what the approach will be to the adoption of these international auditing standards? There's a question.
Can you repeat just
Yes.
one time your question?
Yes, would you like it in French?
No, it's okay. It's okay.
You mentioned earlier that you were looking to adopt ICE's independent auditing standards in Europe, and many people in the profession have seen this as the way forward. Have you decided at this point in time where whether it be by regulation or some other mechanism?
Nous avions évoqué, pour être tout à fait transparent, un certain nombre de points sur lesquels...
Now, to be totally transparent, there are a certain number of points that I like to say that
Le sens de notre action et cette question concerne les standards internationaux.
we can confirm that the audit standards are going to be regulated, and we did say earlier that we want to adopt the same standards all over the European Union. We need an approach that is proportional and appropriate, particularly for small businesses. Now, we need to look further into the various possibilities for implementing these standards. A regulation is one of these possibilities. This can go faster. This was suggested in the report of Mr. Sapidago. But in a similar field, which in accounting standards, we use a system whereby the Commission advances and adopts a number of measures, of ISA measures via committees. So, and here there's a real possibility for changing these standards. So I don't think we could use this system as it stands to our auditing standards. I don't think that's possible. That's about all I can say for the moment on the implementation of standard auditing measures in Europe.
Thank you. We did ask prior to lunch for some written questions, and one of those written questions was in relation to a point that you raised with regard to non-audit services and whether audit-only firms would actually give opportunity to smaller accounting firms. How do you think that this would contribute to creating new players in the market for non-audit services?
Moi, je veux travailler à un marché européen diversifié.
I want to work on a diversified European market. I want to work with competition. Now, I didn't say it earlier, I didn't mean it now, that we're going to force companies to abandon some of their activities. I'd like to see more diversity, I'd like to see more drive. But the idea is not to get the big four stop all their non-audit activities. Nor is my idea to have small businesses pick up all of the non-audit activities that the Big Four are currently providing. But now, what I don't like to see is to have the same company doing both of these activities for one company. So a company that needs an audit and a company that needs advice should get in touch with two different companies. And I think if they don't, then this is jeopardizing good competition. I don't know what time it is here. So I'll take your one.
You're a consultant.
Non, je ne suis pas comme ça. Je vais la regarder. Ça me permet de voir qu'il faut que je sois dans 10 minutes.
So, I can check that I have a different appointment in 10 minutes. So, what I mentioned earlier, spontaneously corresponds to what I believe in and what I'm doing. Polish Med from my department is extremely competent here, both Swedish and Czech. That's double certainty. And this is watching your sector in my department, and he's available and very competent in this dialogue. So we have about 650 people in our department, and we work on about a third of the legislative workload. Now, as I mentioned, we're taking the time. We want to listen. We want to consult. We want to include a certain number of comments and questions in your field as well. Now, I talked about rotating tenders, for example, and we evolved in our initial analysis after our consultation, and there may be more. But the result is not going to be the status quo. I hope we're going to get a stable framework that's stable for a certain number of years so that you can work under better conditions, so that you can build up the confidence, the credibility, the independence that you need. And I'd really like to see this in a much more diversified market, because competition in this field is good, in this field as in others. Now, I'm very sorry that I'm going to have to be leaving you now. Now, I'm not sure I've convinced everybody here, and I will be listening to your conclusions that come out of this conference in the last laps of our decisions.